Hey there, friends. You ever wonder what the ATF does? Yeah, me neither, but let's talk about it anyway. First, guys, check out my friends On Duty. On Duty CBD provides CBD relief for minor aches and pains that you're going to find is a very natural way to take care of these things without putting you into a drug testing category that you are going to fail in the event you do get drug tested at your work. You can get a non-THC or a THC infused CBD, both of which are formed by the University of Kentucky in the state of Kentucky. This is good stuff. It gets rid of all of my neck pain, takes care of all those things, plus I get a better night's sleep. Use my code FTATF, again, FTATF, for a whopping 20% off at On Duty CBD. Check them out, guys. Again, 20% off. Use my discount code FTATF. It would appear that somebody has taken notice that the Glock switches, whatever you want to call them, that make a Glock handgun into a fully automatic pistol has gotten somebody's attention. Regardless of how ineffective and useless these things are, they sure are a big treat for a certain subset of people out there who have nothing better to do than to look cool and try to hold their guns in the wrong way and act like they're badasses. Yes, that's right. I'm talking about the gang culture. This is the only group of people who give a rip about these stupid, useless, ineffective, inaccurate Glock switches. It's a badge of honor to these idiots. And of course, the numbers are increasing as the popularity increases. And the ATF is simply sitting on the sideline, worried about people like me and you if we have, do you have a brace that makes your gun do nothing different? Literally nothing different. Do you have some kind of a device that we did not approve that makes your gun function no different? Or would you rather worry about Glock switches? Yeah, it seems that the ATF is not real worried about Glock switches, just so long as they don't have to fool with them. Yeah, it's a way for them to say, you need us and you need to give us more money, but they're not certainly not doing anything to try to curb the use of these, because guess what? The areas that they would have to enter into to mitigate these types of Glock switches are areas that they might meet some resistance. They'd rather deal with you and me than deal with real criminals. Well, Tom Knighton over at BearingArms.com wrote an interesting piece called Report on Glock Switches Finally Proves Hard Numbers, and he talks about a lot of the different variables that are in play here as far as numbers and how it compares to gun traces by the ATF. Again, the useless ATF could give two rips about the Glock switches. They're just trying to create numbers and inflate these numbers so that they can convince Congress to give them more of our taxpayer money to attack us when they go 0% after Glock switches on the street in violent neighborhoods. Well, I dug a little bit deeper on these, quote, Glock switches after reading this interesting article, and it was pretty eye-opening. The first thing I wanted to know is, if they're talking about all of these numbers and how wildly and widely used these Glock switches are, I was curious if the justification for more legislation, which, by the way, quick side note, Glock switches in every form imaginable are illegal to even possess in the United States. It's a federal law that you cannot possess a Glock switch. So you can't hold one in your hand, you can't have one on your gun, you can't have one in the next room. These legislators, in their infinite wisdom, want to create additional laws to, get this, ban Glock switches. They literally are calling for state laws to ban Glock switches. It's a federal law already. It's like me putting forth new legislation to ban murder. Isn't that law already there? It's equivalent to the hate law, or it's a hate crime type thing. There's a law in place already. How about enforce the law that's literally already there, and let's just move on from there instead of littering the books with more stupid, useless laws that the criminals don't care about. I wanted to see how much of an epidemic these Glock switches were because, me being an avid shooter, I know how useless these are. Law enforcement, if they wanted them, if there was an argument to be made for law enforcement to have and utilize Glock switches, it would be made, right? Because full auto, law enforcement already has that as far as their AR-15s. Why do they have it? Because they feel like it's useful. They feel like they can. Again, I'm talking about untrained people in most cases with law enforcement who cannot utilize full auto anything. But nevertheless, it is easier to control a full auto long gun than it is to control a full auto handgun. So the reason why law enforcement does not implement the use of Glock switches in handguns is because guess what? They're completely useless. As this video shows right here, the muzzle rises after the first shot, and you are completely spraying over the head of whatever you're trying to hit. And utilizing a handgun at any kind of real distance, let's remember, most of these gangbangers that are utilizing these, and believe me, they are not being used outside of gang activity. Trust me on this. The statistics and facts are out there. So all these gangbangers who are using these, they're using them because they're cowards at great distances. The longer the distance between your shot, how much more ineffective is that muzzle rise going to be than at close range? Way more. It's amplified astronomically from any kind of real distance. So that's why you're not hearing about a lot of people being shot, killed, or even injured utilizing Glock switches. They're ineffective, they're useless, and they're stupid. That's why law enforcement doesn't say, hey, what about us? Even though they're outlawed everywhere else, we could have them if we wanted them in law enforcement. They don't because they're idiotic and stupid. There's only a small group of group thinkers who are stupid and like to make Instagram videos and things like that to say, look at me, I got a Glock switch, that have these things. Too stupid to realize that on top of the fact that you have a useless device that's modified your gun, when you hold it sideways, it's even more useless because guess what? Instead of muzzle rise, now you're shooting from, guess what? From right to left. So you're spraying everybody to the left, and you're probably getting a little bit of muzzle rise too, because if you have any kind of cant to it, like most people that are shooting one-handed do, will shoot like this rather than like this, you're going to get that rise like this. So again, completely useless if what you're trying to hit is something that, or what you're trying to aim at is something that you're trying to hit. Not to add insult to injury, but another reason why law enforcement does not want Glock switches is because the same reason why these gangbangers can't hit anything with them is because this is an inexperienced force using these guns. Sorry, I'm sorry. Most law enforcement, they don't touch their firearms but once, sometimes twice a year, simply to qualify. Other than that, they could care less about them. They are not true gun people. They're just like the gangbangers. So they're getting the least amount of training possible. So you're dealing with a workforce that is completely untrained, just like the gangbangers. Again, that's why they don't want them, and that's why the gangbangers aren't hitting anything. Inexperienced, and again, useless. Now, to make my point, looking at these statistics, while the amount of Glock switches is astronomically increasing by anywhere from 40 to 50 and 60% as far as the amount captured on the street by law enforcement, guess what? The amount of hits is either the same or in some areas have gone down. So not only are we seeing a ton of the Glock switches out there, but we're seeing no increase, in fact some decreases in the amount of people being hit because, why? Again, the Glock switches are useless and very ineffective. So essentially, a Glock switch makes our streets safer if you really want to get down to the actual facts and utilize them. They actually are making these people so ineffective that the streets are safer. Now, maybe not for butterflies and things flying through the sky, because that's where those additional rounds are going, because they are registering more rounds fired at these crime scenes. Again, let me repeat that. There's way more, and they attribute this to the Glock switches. There's way more rounds being fired and shell casings found at crime scenes now. However, the amount of hits are the same or going down. They're proving the point that these things are actually making the streets safer. I know that sounds stupid, but if you want to use math to make your case, and by saying something is less safe or more safe, it's certainly making the streets safer. Now, I'm not promoting that we make these legal or, again, start to use them. That's not my point. My point is, if we're going to trust the facts and use facts to make a case, we have to be honest about how we use those facts. Now, after doing a little bit more digging, I found that there were 2 cases where Glock switches were used to shoot at law enforcement. Because, again, law enforcement is trying to, again, pass an additional law. They're screaming for an additional law. But they're saying that, oh, it's making it more dangerous for us. And politicians are saying that, oh, it's making it more dangerous out there for these guys. So let's pass a new law because it's more dangerous for law enforcement and blah, blah, blah. I found 2 cases that law enforcement had been shot at with guns modified by Glock switches. Now, it's important that we understand context here. The guns, the pistols, the Glocks themselves did have Glock switches. There's no proof that the actual full auto feature was utilized. In fact, the only case that I found of a law enforcement officer being hit with a pistol modified with a Glock switch was here recently, not even a month ago. Shootout with Dallas murder suspect renews focus on illegal Glock switches. There was a shootout here, and here's the video of it, where these law enforcement officers were going after a suspected murderer, and he utilized a Glock switch-enabled gun with, here we go, an extendo magazine. Here's the news report.
That's what a U.S. Marshals task force faced as they tried to arrest Jordan Owens, a suspect in a murder and a robbery from last month. One officer was shot in the leg. That handgun was turned essentially into a small machine gun when you get right down to it, was it not?
It was. That's right, Doug. Police Chief Eddie Garcia said today the gun had an extended magazine to hold more rounds. It also had a device on the back of the gun that's commonly called a Glock switch. Now, these are very small devices. As I said, they attach right there to the back, and it modifies the trigger on the handgun, so you don't have to pull it each time you want to fire a shot. You can just hold it down, and it makes a handgun do something like this.
So if you look at the video, you can clearly see not only some of the rounds, or 1 or 2 rounds, coming through the wall into the hallway when the law enforcement officers are out there, but the audio of it certainly proves that no Glock switch was used. Again, the pistol may have been enabled with a Glock switch, but the guy was not using a Glock switch function shooting at these law enforcement officers. Listen to the audio with the video one more time and you tell me. So unless my ears are lying to me, I don't hear the use of a Glock switch, but the gun was modified with a Glock switch. One law enforcement officer was struck in the leg by a round from that gun. So unless the guy was shooting at the ground with the amount of muzzle rise that he has, I find it very unlikely that the person was using a Glock switch based on the videos that we've seen with the muzzle rise, because immediately it begins to rise, and if he shot the guy in the leg, maybe that was the first round from the Glock switch, meaning technically the technology of the Glock switch is not what hit him, because only the first round is probably the accurate round. The rest of them are sending through the roof. And again, I don't think it was enabled in this case. Audio doesn't show that. And when you see the video of the round coming through the wall in the hallway, it's 1 or 2 rounds. It's not like a stream of rounds coming through the drywall there. What is my point in all this? My point is that journalists are not journalists anymore. This is another case of the media lying to you, because the media would have you believe with these types of headlines that there is a massive spike in potential danger to the communities, and it's just the opposite of that. Again, I'm not condoning or trying to say that we should have Glock switches or saying that it's okay to use them. I think they're stupid and they're useless, and they could be dangerous. If a child got a hold of them, they certainly could be dangerous. I think that Glock switches are something that we don't need. I personally don't believe they should be outlawed, again, because of the Second Amendment. I think that the media and politicians do a really good job of taking the actions of criminals and applying that to honest, law-abiding people across the board. In other words, they take a very small subset of people who are committing the crimes and utilizing these illegal devices and try to say that now we need a new law that will now affect every single law-abiding gun owner out there. So we're the ones that take the brunt of any stupid new law, and the criminals either don't know that you passed a new law because they don't care, or they do know and they completely ignore them, because guess what? They actually are criminals, right? By definition, they do not follow the law. Again, the fact that they are outlawed federally and these politicians want a new state law is a perfect example of ignorance and stupidity, because they already are not legal, and you're trying to pass another law to make them more illegal, more illegaler, right? That's what you're trying to do. You're thinking an additional law will get someone's attention, and the criminals are proving to you they already don't care. They won't care about your new law that you pass. It's not going to give them more teeth. Do you think they're going to spend any more time in jail? The Soros-funded DAs are already dropping all the gun charges and letting these people out on the street. So an additional gun charge is not going to matter to these people. This is a purposely created vicious cycle to get these people to utilize devices like this, throw them in jail, let them right back out again so they can continue to commit more crimes. That way you have more fuel to add to the fire to come after people like us who are not committing the crimes, because guess what? You want to create a new law to stop the criminals that you keep letting out. It's not about the criminals, it's not about safety, it's about disarming us, and it always has been. This is a cycle that has been created, and it's actually very effective because it does get the attention of officials and politicians across the country. In closing, I want to state one thing, and this is the thing that I want to drive home, and we all need to remember when people try to guilt us into going along with an anti-gun law that somebody wants to pass. As long as criminals have Glock switches, and as long as criminals exist, and as long as criminals have any level of firearm out there, I want the most lethal, the most deadly weapon out there that holds the most rounds. Because as long as those people have something, I want something better. I want something that's going to eliminate that threat faster, quicker, more effective. In fact, you know what I want? There aren't weapons of war on the street right now. They are not. They don't exist. They are not the types of weapons that the military has on the streets of America. Yes, I know that comes as a shock because of everything you hear from the politicians and the wackos on the far left and the controlled media, right? Because they tell you that weapons of war don't belong in the street. Well, they're not on the street, but guess what? I do believe they belong on the street. I honestly believe that as long as these criminals are involved in this cycle that the left continues to allow to happen, and the right too, there's people on the right that are right in there with them, as long as we continue to allow these things to happen in order to generate more revenue into these other bureaucracies out there to fund them. Again, this is a turn and look the other way while the crime happens so that we can beg for more money. As long as that system remains in place, I want a weapon of war. Again, I want the most deadly thing available out there to protect myself and my family, because I don't have time to wait for somebody who's scared and somebody who's not trained to drive to my house to pick up the pieces and file a report after a criminal has already done his damage and left my home. I want to be the tip of the spear. And guess what? I am the tip of the spear, and I know many of you are out there. Keep it up, ignore these wackos, and fight the good fight, and do not let them guilt you into thinking that more gun laws are okay.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.